The morning light had a dull, almost apologetic hue, filtering through the thin linen curtains in our kitchen like it knew it had overstayed its welcome. I stood barefoot on the cold tile floor, cradling a cup of weak coffee between my hands. Not because I needed caffeine, but because I needed something to hold. The house was quiet. Not the comforting kind of quiet, but the type that settles in when conversation has long since become functional. My husband was finishing his last spoonful of oatmeal. I could hear the sound of metal against ceramic. Soft, precise, like everything else about him. He glanced up briefly, offering a faint smile. "You okay?" "Yeah, just thinking," I said without looking at him. That was our rhythm. Check-ins that skimmed the surface. No probing. No drowning. We weren't broken. Nothing dramatic had happened. We didn't argue, didn't yell. He worked. I managed the house. We had friends, routines, even laughter sometimes. From the outside, we looked like the sort of couple people envied for their stability. And maybe they were right. But stability has a taste too. It's bland, like boiled rice without salt. He kissed me on the temple as he left, his lips dry and familiar. A kiss out of habit, a reflex. I waited for the sound of the front door clicking shut, then exhaled. That kind of breath that escapes only when you're finally alone. I wandered the house like I was new to it, trailing my fingers along furniture I dusted weekly. Everything in its place. Everything as it should be. Except me. When I reached the kitchen again, I stared at the refrigerator. Not out of hunger, just searching for something to fill the blank space inside me. That was when I saw the flyer. A local grocery delivery service I hadn't noticed before. It was taped to the side panel next to a magnet I didn't remember placing. The flyer wasn't flashy, just functional. A QR code, a number, a promise of convenience. I scanned it with my phone. I didn't need anything really, but I filled the cart anyway. Milk, bananas, a box of herbal tea I rarely drank. I scheduled the delivery for the afternoon. There was something oddly thrilling about it, as if I had made a decision that hadn't been pre-approved by habit. The rest of the day passed in a soft blur. I tidied up rooms that didn't need tidying, folded laundry that could have waited. Around 3, I heard the doorbell. I hesitated, then walked to the side entrance where we usually received packages. When I opened the door, I wasn't sure what I expected. Certainly not him. He stood there in a plain navy hoodie and work pants, holding 2 paper bags. He wasn't tall or conventionally attractive, but there was an ease about him, like he belonged exactly where he was, in contrast to me, who always felt slightly misplaced in my own skin. His eyes flicked up to meet mine, not in a hurry, not apologetic. "Delivery for..." He glanced at the receipt. "You, I guess." I nodded, not trusting my voice, and reached for the bag. Our fingers brushed, barely, but it was enough to jolt something I didn't know had fallen asleep. He didn't pull his hand back right away. He smiled. Not the kind you give a customer. It was softer, more curious. "You read this?" he asked, pointing at the paperback resting on the counter behind me. I had left it there earlier, face down. "Sometimes," I said. He nodded slowly, as if cataloging something about me, then handed over the other bag. "Have a good day." And he left. I stood there for a long moment, watching the spot where he'd been. The air still felt charged. I set the bags down and opened the nearest one. The groceries were just groceries. No special lighting, no secret note. And yet I felt like someone had just whispered something into my neck. That night, I got ready for bed earlier than usual. I brushed my hair slower, applied lotion to my arms and legs, not out of routine, but with a kind of care I hadn't shown myself in years. In the mirror, I saw not a wife, not a woman ticking off another day. I saw someone waiting. For what, I didn't know. My husband came in and kissed me goodnight. He asked how my day was. I said it was fine. We turned off the lights. The bed was warm, our bodies separated by a gentle silence. He fell asleep quickly, the rise and fall of his breath steady beside me. I lay there, eyes open to the dark, my skin still tingling from a touch that hadn't meant anything. Except it did. It had to. I kept replaying that moment at the door. His gaze. The way his fingers felt against mine, just for a second. It was ridiculous. He was just a delivery guy. It was barely a conversation. But something inside me had shifted. Not dramatically. not with sound or violence. Just a quiet tilt, like a frame slightly off kilter on the wall. You don't notice it at first, but once you do, it's all you can see.
Mañana lo volvería a ver. Y no tenía la menor idea de qué hacer con eso. No lo planeé. No lo busqué. Pero cuando vi su nombre en la pantalla del móvil de mi hijo, cuando escuché su voz grave filtrarse desde la puerta del gimnasio, supe que mi cuerpo lo había estado esperando. Fingí sorpresa. Fingí que había pasado por allí por equivocación. Mi hijo aún no había llegado. Él sí. Estaba solo. Vestía una camiseta gris, ajustada, húmeda por el sudor. El cabello revuelto, aún brillante por el esfuerzo físico. Sus manos colgaban relajadas a los lados, pero sus ojos, al verme, se tensaron un instante. No fue un saludo formal. No fue ese hola casual que se lanza a la madre de un amigo. Fue otra cosa. Una pausa. Un reconocimiento. Dijo algo sobre que podía acompañarme hasta que mi hijo llegara. Respondí con un gesto vago. Caminamos hacia la cafetería del gimnasio. El lugar estaba medio vacío. Apenas algunas conversaciones apagadas y el zumbido constante del aire acondicionado. Pedimos café. Yo con leche. Él solo. El calor de la taza entre mis dedos apenas equilibraba el frío que comenzaba a subir por mi espalda. No del clima. De él. Se sentó frente a mí. No apartó la vista. No la desvió. No la disimuló. La sostuvo. Directa. Honesta. Incomodante. Me sentí expuesta. Desnuda, aunque estuviera completamente vestida. Hablamos de cosas triviales. O fingimos hacerlo. Él mencionó la universidad. Su último proyecto. Una salida a la montaña. Yo contesté con frases neutras. Mis palabras eran una capa de barniz sobre una madera que ya se resquebrajaba por dentro. Lo que decía no importaba. Importaba el silencio entre palabra y palabra, esa tensión suspendida que llenaba cada espacio vacío. No me preguntó por mi esposo. No mencionó a mi hijo. Era como si, por esos minutos, el mundo se hubiera reducido a 2 tazas de café y una mesa entre nosotros. Al salir, el sol nos golpeó con fuerza. Me detuve un segundo, deslumbrada. Él alzó la mano para proteger mis ojos. No me tocó, pero su gesto bastó para descolocar algo dentro de mí. Bajamos juntos las escaleras del edificio. Entonces, sin que me diera palabra, sin anuncio ni advertencia, me detuve. No sé si lo hice yo o si fue él quien se detuvo primero, pero el mundo se congeló. Me giré. Lo miré. Y en ese espacio diminuto, entre una respiración y otra, sus labios encontraron los míos. No fue dulce. No fue cuidadoso. Fue directo, con la urgencia contenida de lo prohibido, con la brutal honestidad de 2 personas que ya no pueden sostener la mentira de la distancia. Sentí sus dedos en mi espalda, apenas rozándome. Mis manos no supieron dónde apoyarse. Me quedé inmóvil, dejándome besar. Y luego respondí, porque había algo en mí que había estado esperando exactamente ese contacto. Esa boca. Esa decisión. No duró más de lo que dura un semáforo. Pero fue suficiente. Nos separamos en silencio. Yo no hablé. Él tampoco. Sus ojos estaban abiertos, atentos a mi reacción. No hubo disculpas. No hubo justificaciones. Solo esa mirada que me pedía que no negara lo que había pasado, que no pretendiera que fue un error. Caminé hasta mi coche. Me temblaban las piernas. Cerré la puerta, apoyé la frente sobre el volante. Mi respiración era irregular. El latido en mi garganta era tan intenso que casi dolía. La pregunta no era por qué lo había hecho. La verdadera pregunta era por qué no me sentía culpable. En el camino de regreso, todo parecía distinto. Los árboles, la radio encendida, los semáforos. Como si el mundo hubiera cambiado de textura. Más denso, más real. En casa, la cocina me recibió con su olor habitual. Café viejo y pan tostado. Mi esposo no estaba. Me senté a la mesa y apoyé las manos sobre el mantel. Las mismas manos que aún temblaban. Esa noche me duché con lentitud. No por limpieza, por necesidad. Quería sentir el agua en cada rincón de mi cuerpo. Cerré los ojos bajo la corriente caliente y dejé que el recuerdo del beso se mezclara con el vapor. No era el beso lo que me perturbaba, era lo que había desatado en mí. La conciencia de mi piel, de mi carne, de lo que había estado dormido por años. Fui a mi habitación envuelta en la toalla. Abrí el cajón y saqué de nuevo la lencería. Esta vez la puse sobre la cama. La observé. Era negra, con bordes de encaje que apenas cubrían lo esencial. La había comprado en un impulso hacía años y jamás la había usado. Hasta ahora, Era solo una promesa guardada. Me la puse con cuidado. Ajusté las tiras, observé mi reflejo en el espejo. No era joven. Mis caderas no eran firmes. Mis pechos no eran altos. Pero había algo en mí que aún podía provocar deseo. Lo vi en sus ojos. Lo sentí en su boca. Entré al dormitorio. Mi esposo ya dormía. Me acosté a su lado. No dije nada. No me moví. Cerré los ojos. En mi piel aún estaba el fantasma de otros labios. No sentí remordimiento. Sentí vida.
He laughed softly, and it cracked something in me. The kind of laugh that didn't demand anything, that simply acknowledged being here, being human. We talked. About nothing. The weather, traffic, coffee preferences. But under every word ran a current. Like music playing under dialogue in a film. You don't hear it unless you listen for it. But it changes everything. Then it happened. He set his cup down. I was still holding mine. He stepped closer. Not a full step. Just enough. I didn't move back. My breath caught in my throat, but I didn't release it. You know, he said slowly, I should probably go. You should, I replied. But neither of us did. He tilted his head slightly, eyes fixed on mine. I could feel the heat from his skin before I felt his lips. The kiss was soft, not tentative, just deliberate. He kissed like someone who knew how. Not rushed, not demanding, just present. I don't remember closing my eyes. I remember the texture of his mouth, the contrast between the rough skin of his palm and the silk of my cheek when he touched me. I remember the warmth that pulsed through my chest, not lust, not yet, but longing, recognition. It ended quickly. A breath and it was over. He stepped back. I'm sorry, he said. Don't be. He nodded, then walked to the door, paused, opened it, and left. I stood in the kitchen, tea now cold in my hand, every cell in my body lit from within. The silence after he left was unbearable. It pressed down on me, filled the corners. I sat on the floor, knees to my chest, the hem of my shirt rising just enough to let the air touch my skin. My nipples tightened against the cotton. My stomach fluttered. My lips still tingled. That night, when my husband came home, I was in the kitchen again. Hair brushed, shirt changed. He kissed my cheek and asked what I'd done today. Nothing much, I said. He didn't notice anything different. We watched a movie together. I don't remember which one. He dozed off midway. I watched him sleep. His face relaxed, jaw slack, body curled slightly toward the backrest. He looked peaceful, trusting. I turned the TV off and walked into the bedroom. Undressed slowly, stood in front of the mirror again. My shirt dropped to the floor. I traced my lips with my finger. I remembered. It wasn't love. It wasn't betrayal. Not yet. But I knew now what it felt like to want. And to be wanted back. The days that followed were like walking through water. Slow, distorted, and far too quiet. Everything around me carried a faint echo of that moment in the kitchen, as if my world had been tilted just slightly off its axis. I continued to function, because function was second nature. I cleaned, I folded clothes, I answered emails, I watered plants. My hands moved on autopilot, but my thoughts had taken up residence somewhere else entirely. The kiss hadn't changed my life. It hadn't destroyed anything, but it had unsettled the very foundation I'd built my sense of self upon. I hadn't kissed anyone else in over 15 years. Not even in dreams. Not even in forgotten impulses. My marriage wasn't cold. It wasn't hostile. It just wasn't intimate. And I had convinced myself that was fine. That closeness meant something else when you'd been with someone that long. That physical hunger became emotional reliance. That safety replaced the fire. But now, after that single brush of warmth, I felt like a liar. I tried to return to routine. I even made an effort to be present when my husband spoke. He told me about a new project at work, about an upcoming business trip to Chicago, about his mother's arthritis acting up again. I nodded in all the right places, smiled when expected. We shared dinner. We watched another documentary. He reached for my hand on the couch and I didn't pull away, but my fingers stayed limp in his. He noticed. I know he did. He didn't say anything, but the silence after was loaded. Not accusatory, just waited. As if he'd started a sentence in his head and decided not to finish it out loud. That evening, while he worked on his laptop in the study, I found myself standing in the hallway, looking at the closed door. I could hear the gentle clacking of keys. That sound had become his background music. His real soundtrack. I waited a moment longer before retreating to the bedroom. I lay down in the dark, but sleep didn't come. My body felt restless, overly aware of every thread in the sheets, every wrinkle in the pillowcase. My skin was alert, as if expecting to be touched. It wasn't desire in the way people imagine it. It was deeper than that. A need to feel real, seen, wanted without pretense or obligation. The next morning, I didn't check the delivery app. I told myself it was better this way. But when I opened the fridge and saw the untouched milk from last week's order, I felt a pull in my stomach. He had touched that carton. Briefly, indirectly. But still, by late afternoon, my husband surprised me. He came home earlier than usual, holding a bottle of wine and a slight smile. "I thought we could go out tonight," he said. It wasn't a question. It was more like a proposal. Hesitant but hopeful. I agreed, of course. I always did. I dressed carefully. Nothing too obvious. A navy blouse with a delicate neckline, a pair of simple gold earrings I hadn't worn in months. I took my time with mascara, smoothed my hair. When I stepped into the hallway, he looked up from his phone and smiled, genuinely. "You look beautiful," he said. I thanked him, my voice soft. But the compliment landed strangely, as though it had arrived too late or missed the place it was meant to fill. We went to a familiar restaurant downtown. It was quiet, lit with dim amber lights and small flickering candles on each table. The kind of place we used to visit in our early years when we dressed up for no reason and ordered things we couldn't pronounce. The waiter brought menus. We didn't need them. We always ordered the same things. But we looked anyway, out of habit. I watched him over the rim of my wine glass. His face was still handsome, in a well-kept kind of way. There were new lines near his eyes, a little more gray at his temples. But it suited him. He was still the man I had chosen. Still the one who had held my hand during long waits in hospital rooms, who had unpacked boxes with me when we moved into this house, who remembered how I took my coffee even when I forgot. But I no longer knew if he saw me. Not the woman he married, but the one I had become in the years since. We ate. We spoke. The conversation hovered on safe topics. His work, a mutual friend's new job, a renovation show he thought I'd like. He made an effort. I did too. But something was missing between us. Not animosity, just absence. As we waited for dessert, he looked at me for a long moment. His fingers traced the stem of his glass. Then he said, "You've been somewhere else lately." I looked down at the tablecloth, its soft linen fibers suddenly fascinating. "I don't know what you mean," I said, not unkindly. He smiled, but there was no joy in it. "I think you do." A silence settled. Not angry, just truthful. I didn't reply. There was nothing safe left to say. On the drive home, I stared out the window. The city passed by in soft blurs of light and motion. My hands were folded in my lap. His were on the wheel, 10 and 2, like always. When we arrived home, he opened the door for me. A small gesture. Familiar? But when our hands touched briefly as I stepped out, I didn't feel the warmth I expected. Not rejection. Just nothing. We went to bed early. He kissed me again. I responded lightly, enough to reassure. He pressed closer, as if searching for something. I didn't pull away, but I didn't reach back. After he fell asleep, I lay awake once more. I stared at the ceiling, trying to catalog what I was feeling. Guilt wasn't the right word, nor was desire. It was a mix of sadness and craving, like a song you remember but can't quite hum. I wanted to want him. I wanted to return to the safe simplicity of what we had. But I couldn't unknow the way my body had answered to someone else's presence. I couldn't forget how alive I had felt in the middle of a weekday morning, with grocery bags in my arms and a stranger's lips on mine. It wasn't love. Not even infatuation. It was just the beginning of something I hadn't allowed myself to imagine before. And somewhere, deep in the space between silence and confession, I knew it wouldn't end here. I didn't intend to see him again. At least, not that week. I'd told myself it was a moment, an impulse. Strange and intense, but self-contained. I clung to that narrative like it could undo everything that had been stirred inside me. I busied myself with tasks, filled the hours with errands I would have usually delayed, baked things I didn't even want to eat, reorganized drawers that no one touched. And yet, in the quiet spaces between movement, he returned to me. Not as a fantasy, not as some adolescent daydream, but as a presence. One that lived behind my ribs and made it difficult to breathe without remembering. Still, I stayed away from the app. For 4 days, I avoided it entirely. I was proud of that. Or maybe just determined to feel proud. I went to the store myself, carried my own bags. At the checkout counter, when the clerk smiled at me and asked if I wanted paper or plastic, I nodded absently, unhearing. I couldn't focus on anything outside my own skin. It didn't matter how many things I put between us. He had already settled somewhere deeper. Not in my schedule, not in my habits, but in the space I hadn't realized was empty until he walked into it. On the 5th day, I saw him again. Not at the door. Not because I ordered anything. I saw him by chance, if there is such a thing. I was walking home from the florist. I had bought a small bouquet of tulips on impulse. Yellow. Not my favorite, not even close, but something about their brightness made me feel momentarily lighter. The sky had that silvery tone it sometimes gets before rain, and the streets were quieter than usual. I took the long way home. I think I needed the air. I told myself it was for the walk, that I needed to stretch, clear my head, reconnect with my surroundings. But I turned left instead of right at the usual block, passing a row of narrow brick homes with ivy-covered fences and garden cats slinking between hedges. That's where I saw him. He was sitting outside a small cafe I'd never paid attention to. Not with a delivery bag, not in uniform. Just a gray t-shirt, jeans, a book in one hand, a coffee cup in the other. He was leaning back, one foot tapping lightly, head tilted as he read. The sight of him, unprepared, unposed, sent a flush of heat up my spine. Not because he looked different, because he looked the same. And somehow so familiar. I slowed without meaning to. He hadn't seen me. For a second, I debated walking past him, fast, unnoticed. But something stronger pulled me forward. I stopped a few feet away. My voice was barely above the street noise. "You read poetry?" He looked up. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something softer. Not quite a smile, not quite disbelief. "Sometimes," he said, closing the book halfway. "You stalking me?" "Coincidence," I lied. "I didn't know this cafe existed." "It's new, not bad. They make real espresso." I hesitated, fingers tightening around the tulips. "Want to sit?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. I should have said no. I should have smiled politely, made an excuse, and kept walking. But I was already moving before the thought completed. I sat down, laying the flowers carefully in my lap. We didn't speak for a minute. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was watchful, charged. The kind of quiet that breathes on its own, aware that it might break. "I was wondering if I'd see you again," he said. "You said you didn't usually ask people about poetry?" I replied. "I assumed that meant you don't usually kiss them either." He laughed once, softly. "Fair point." There was a pause, then he leaned slightly forward. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable, if that's what I did." I shook my head too quickly. "You didn't." He looked at me carefully, as if trying to decide whether to believe me. I wasn't even sure if I believed myself. Then he nodded, almost to himself, and leaned back again. We talked, this time longer, about his schedule, his other job, about the book he was reading, which wasn't poetry at all, just a collection of short stories. I told him I used to write once. Not professionally, but enough to leave scraps of myself in forgotten notebooks. The conversation drifted, then looped back, then fell into quiet again. Eventually, I glanced at the sky. "Looks like rain." He followed my gaze. "Yeah, should probably head out." Neither of us moved. He looked at me again, more seriously this time. "This isn't just a thing, is it?" I knew what he meant. The delivery, the kiss, this cafe, the ache behind every casual word. "I don't know what it is," I admitted. "But I think about it more than I should." He nodded slowly, then stood, picking up his bag. I rose too, holding the tulips against my chest like armor. I wasn't planning to run into you, I said. He smiled. Maybe you weren't running. He walked away before I could respond. I stood in place for another moment, then made my way home. The tulips had begun to open slightly, their petals relaxed. The house felt colder than usual when I entered. I filled a vase and placed the flowers in it, setting them in the middle of the kitchen table. A small, bright contradiction to the neutral tones around them. That night, I didn't mention the cafe. I told my husband I'd gone for a walk, bought some flowers. He liked them. Said the color reminded him of summer. He poured me a glass of wine while telling me about his mother's doctor appointment. I nodded, responded where needed. He kissed my neck absent-mindedly as he passed behind me. His lips barely touched the skin. It didn't feel bad. It just didn't register. Later, I stood in front of the mirror, towel wrapped around me, hair damp. I stared at my own eyes and wondered when I had started to feel like a stranger inside my own reflection. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I wasn't planning an affair. There was no master plot, no secret countdown. But something inside me had come unfastened. Not completely. Just enough to shift the air around me. The next morning, I opened the delivery app. I didn't place an order. I didn't even log in. But I looked. And I stayed on that screen far longer than I needed to. The morning started like any other. Quiet, uneventful, held together by the brittle scaffolding of routine. My husband was packing for another weekend trip to visit his mother. He moved through the bedroom with practiced efficiency. Shirts folded, toiletries arranged, a small travel bag zipped with precision. I watched him from the doorway, coffee cooling in my hand, the steam long gone. His presence had become a soundless current in the background of my life, steady and unchanging. He kissed my cheek before leaving. Said he'd call when he got there, reminded me to check the thermostat since the weather was shifting. I nodded, offered a faint smile, and saw him out. The sound of the door closing echoed through the hallway like a punctuation mark I hadn't asked for. I waited until I heard his car pull away, then stood motionless in the foyer. The house held a strange stillness, like it knew something I didn't. My fingertips tingled with the weight of anticipation I hadn't allowed myself to name. I didn't plan to call him. I told myself that again and again. But the idea had already settled somewhere deep, pushing out every other thought. The app was still on my phone. I opened it without resistance, without hesitation. My thumb moved through the menu as if guided by memory rather than intention. This time, I didn't bother with pretense. I ordered only one item, an overpriced herbal tea I never drank. I set the delivery time for early afternoon. It was late enough to shower, to prepare, but not so late that the light would be gone from the windows. I stood in front of the closet for too long. Everything I owned felt wrong. Too stiff, too casual, too obvious. Eventually, I chose a silk slip I hadn't worn in over a year and threw a loose cardigan over it. Barefoot, I moved through the house in silence, as if any sound might disrupt the fragile balance of what I was allowing to happen. When the doorbell rang, I didn't jump. I opened the side entrance and there he was. Again, without his uniform, wearing a black t-shirt and jeans, the delivery bag slung over one shoulder. His eyes met mine and held them. He said nothing. Neither did I. He stepped inside. I closed the door behind him, the latch clicking with an almost ceremonial finality. The air was dense between us, thick with the unsaid. "I wasn't sure you'd actually call," he said, voice low. "I didn't," I answered. "I just ordered tea." He smiled, barely. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the surface but simmers somewhere beneath. He set the small paper bag on the kitchen counter but didn't step away from it. His body remained turned toward mine, his gaze following every slight movement I made. "I miss seeing you," he said. I didn't answer. Words felt too fragile, too capable of breaking whatever was already unraveling between us. Instead, I walked past him, slowly, and gestured toward the hallway. He followed. We didn't go to the bedroom. That would have been too loud, too official. We ended up in the guest room, a space untouched by routine. The sheets were crisp, the air faintly musty from lack of use. I sat on the edge of the bed, my legs tucked to the side, fingers resting lightly on my knees. He stood in the doorway for a moment longer, as if testing the weight of what we were doing. Then he came closer. The silence stretched thin, Every movement was magnified. The way his hand reached for mine. The way I let him. The way he leaned in, not asking for permission, just reading the room. My breath. The subtle way I tilted my face upward. The kiss this time was different. Not soft. Not searching. It was certain. There was nothing hesitant in it. Nothing casual. His mouth met mine like a decision that had already been made, and my body responded before my mind had time to interfere. His hand slid into my hair, the other resting against my waist, and everything narrowed to that one point of contact. I didn't stop him. I didn't want to. I felt his weight, his warmth, the solid realness of him. Not fantasy, not illusion, just breath, skin, muscle, life. We didn't speak. The room held our bodies like it had been waiting for us, like it had been made for this suspended hour where nothing else existed. There were no declarations, no promises. Just the sound of breath mingling and the soft creak of the mattress beneath shifting weight. When it ended, we stayed there, side by side, not quite touching. I watched the light shift across the ceiling, my chest rising and falling in a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. He turned his head toward me. "This isn't fair to you," he said eventually. Or to him. I nodded, but I didn't ask him to leave. Eventually he stood, adjusted his shirt, and sat on the edge of the bed to put his shoes back on. The normalcy of that action struck me like a slap. How easily we returned to roles, to manners, even when the ground had shifted beneath us. He didn't say goodbye. He just looked at me once more before disappearing down the hallway and out the door. The house was still again. I lay on the bed for a long time. I didn't cry. There was no guilt, not in the way I expected. There was something else. A low, persistent ache. Not regret. Not relief. Just the weight of having crossed something irreversible. When I stood, the sheets were wrinkled. I smoothed them carefully, remade the bed, adjusted the pillows, erased the signs. That evening, when my husband called, I answered. He asked about my day. I said it had been quiet. He told me about the long drive, about his mother's new medication, about how she asked if I'd come next time. I agreed, said I would. My voice was even. Natural. After we hung up, I took a long shower. Let the water run down my body, scrubbed harder than necessary. But I didn't feel cleaner. I walked through the house barefoot, lights dimmed, fingers trailing along the furniture. In the kitchen, the bag of tea still sat on the counter. I didn't put it away. I didn't drink it. I just stood there, staring at it while the silence folded itself around me again. More familiar this time. More permanent. And somewhere deep in my chest, behind all the stillness, lived the quiet knowledge that I would see him again. Not because I planned it. Because now I couldn't not. The air inside the house had changed. It wasn't just in my head. There was a different texture to everything. The way sound moved through the rooms. The way my footsteps echoed slightly different on the hardwood, as if the floors were adjusting to something new. I felt it in the mornings especially, that strange, quiet charge, like the moments before a storm when the sky forgets how to breathe. After that day in the guest room, I thought something in me would settle. That the gnawing ache, the constant pull would subside, having had what it wanted. But it didn't. If anything, it intensified. I was more aware of myself than ever, of my body, my mind, my pulse. I moved through the house like someone who had taken off a mask but wasn't quite ready to look in the mirror. I expected to hear from him. A message, a knock, anything. But the next day passed. Then the next, and another. And he didn't come. I checked the app more than once. Pretended I was browsing for something we might need. I added items to the cart, deleted them, then added them again. But I never placed the order. Not because I didn't want to see him. I did, painfully. But because I didn't want to be the one who chased. I told myself I'd wait. If he wanted to reach out, he would. I waited 4 days. On the 5th, a delivery notification lit up my phone. The same service, but it wasn't my account. It was his name, and the delivery was for another address. I stared at the screen for a long time. That should have been the end of it. A signal, a boundary. But it wasn't. I created a new profile. Entered a neighbor's address 2 streets over. I knew the neighborhood well enough to pick a house that was usually vacant. an older couple who traveled often. I scheduled the delivery for the same afternoon, around the time he'd typically be on this route. It was stupid, reckless, but my hands moved like they belonged to someone else. I dressed without thinking, but with intention. A simple dress, one I hadn't worn in over a year, soft cotton with a neckline that dipped just enough to remind me of how my skin responded when watched. I tied my hair loosely, left my lips bare. Nothing calculated, but nothing accidental either. I walked to the house 15 minutes before the scheduled delivery, stood at the corner of the porch like I belonged there. The doorbell had a small crack in it, the paint peeling just enough to match the way I felt inside, intact from a distance, but fragile up close. When he turned the corner and saw me, something shifted in his stride. Not hesitation, just recognition. His eyes met mine and didn't flinch. "I should have known," he said, stepping closer. I didn't know what else to do. His jaw tightened, not with anger, but with restraint. He handed me the paper bag, fingers brushing mine. That now familiar current passed between us like a language without words. "I haven't stopped thinking about you," I said, quietly. He looked down, then back up. "I thought maybe you regretted it, that maybe I'd overstepped." "You didn't." He exhaled, slow and measured. Then, after a pause, "I didn't come back because I didn't want to make it worse. For you." "It's already worse," I replied. "But pretending it didn't happen doesn't fix anything." We stood there, two people in the wrong place at the wrong time, doing something that felt more honest than anything else in our lives. He reached up and touched my face, just barely, like testing if I was real. His thumb traced my cheekbone. That small gesture hit harder than any kiss. It wasn't lust. It wasn't performance. It was longing, pared down to its purest form. Neither of us moved forward. We didn't cross any lines. The line had already been erased days ago. When he left, I didn't watch him walk away. I turned and sat on the steps of the porch, holding the paper bag like it meant something. I stayed there for almost an hour. Later that evening, I stood in the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. My face looked the same, but it wasn't. There was something behind my eyes now. Some unspoken knowledge that had burrowed deep and wouldn't leave. My husband returned from his trip that night, tired but talkative. He hugged me when he came in, held me for a second longer than usual. Maybe he sensed something, or maybe he was just glad to be home. We sat at the table while he ate leftovers. I poured wine, listened as he told me about the drive, the traffic, how his mother seemed better this time. I nodded, asked questions where it made sense. He smiled at me once, eyes soft. "You seem different," he said, in a good way, calmer. "Maybe I just missed you," I answered. It wasn't a lie. I did miss him. His presence, his certainty. The version of myself that used to find comfort in that. He reached for my hand across the table. I let him hold it. Later that night, as we lay in bed, he turned to me, touched my waist beneath the sheets. His hands were familiar, practiced, gentle. I let him move closer. I let his mouth find mine. I responded. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but out of a deep, confused craving to feel something, anything, that could anchor me back to this life. But even in the heat of it, even as his breath mixed with mine, I felt a hollowness. Not because of him, but because of what I now knew existed outside of us. The contrast was too sharp, too revealing. Afterward, he fell asleep quickly, his arm resting across my stomach. I lay still beneath it, eyes wide in the dark. I wasn't disgusted. I wasn't angry. I wasn't numb. I was divided. I knew then that this wasn't something that would pass. It wasn't a distraction, a deviation. It was a fracture. And I was no longer sure which side I wanted to stand on. When morning came, I made breakfast like usual. The kitchen was filled with the smell of toast and coffee. My husband smiled as he read the news, sipping slowly from his favorite mug. Everything looked the same. But as I opened the fridge to grab the milk, I saw it. Tucked in the corner, half hidden behind a carton of eggs. The tea, still unopened, still untouched. Like a question I wasn't ready to answer. The days that followed unfolded with a kind of forced normalcy, like someone holding a cracked vase together with trembling hands, pretending the water inside wasn't already seeping through. I kept the house clean, the meals warm, my voice steady. I responded to emails, returned calls, remembered to buy detergent. To anyone watching, I was functioning, composed, whole. But inside, I was moving through a fog thick with memory and hesitation. Nothing felt anchored anymore. Conversations felt like performances. Laughter came too easily or not at all. I'd find myself staring at blank walls, trying to remember what I was doing or why I had entered the room in the first place. I hadn't seen him again. Not in person. Not by accident. He hadn't delivered another order. Hadn't walked past. Hadn't appeared at my door. I told myself it was for the best. That space was what we both needed. That it was a temporary infatuation. Heat mistaken for connection, attention mistaken for intimacy. But none of that logic dulled the ache. Each morning, I resisted the impulse to check the app. Sometimes I opened it anyway, under the guise of curiosity, of seeing what specials were on. I never ordered. Not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't sure what I was even waiting for anymore. Him, or the version of myself that had felt so alive in his presence. Then, on the fourth day, I snapped. Not in any dramatic, visible way, just quietly, softly. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror after another long, sleepless night, staring at my reflection while brushing my teeth. My face looked paler, the skin around my eyes darker, like bruises formed by thoughts instead of fists. I spat the foam into the sink, rinsed, and looked at myself for a long time. Then I walked into the bedroom, opened the drawer where I kept my lingerie, and started pulling things out. Not the cotton sets I wore out of comfort, but the ones pushed to the back. Silks, lace, soft, barely there fabrics I hadn't touched in years. I chose a dark red set. Something about the color felt honest. I dressed slowly, deliberately, letting my body feel the slide of fabric against skin. Over it, I wore a sweater and jeans, nothing dramatic. Just something to step outside in without drawing attention. I didn't tell my husband I was leaving. He was in his office, earbuds in, watching something on his laptop. He looked up briefly and smiled. I waved. The door clicked behind me. It was cloudy. The kind of day that couldn't decide between sun and rain. I walked aimlessly at first, without direction. But my feet knew where to go. They carried me past familiar blocks, through side streets I barely noticed anymore. Past the cafe where I'd first seen him reading, now closed on a weekday morning. Past the row of apartments near the edge of the neighborhood. I kept walking, and then I saw him. He was sitting on a low stone wall outside a laundromat, scrolling through his phone, one leg bouncing absently. No uniform, no delivery bag. Just him, casual, ordinary, and devastatingly real. I didn't hesitate. I crossed the street, approached slowly, the sound of my footsteps pulling his attention upward. When our eyes met, he stood. "You okay?" he asked immediately. I didn't answer. I wasn't even sure what the question meant anymore. I just stared at him, feeling my chest tighten with everything I hadn't said. "I thought maybe I should stop waiting," I said finally. "I thought you had," he replied. The honesty in his voice cracked something open inside me. He looked at me for a long time. Then, quietly, almost cautiously, he said, "Do you want to walk?" I nodded. We moved without talking. Our steps fell into rhythm without effort. We walked through blocks I barely noticed, past parks, fences, houses I didn't recognize. I didn't care where we were going, only that I was beside him. Finally, we reached a small clearing between buildings, a forgotten corner with a narrow bench and a view of nothing in particular. We sat. Silence settled between us. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was waiting. I told myself I wouldn't push. He said eventually, that this wasn't mine to decide. "I didn't think I'd feel this," I said. "Not again. Not like this." He nodded but said nothing. "I don't know what this is," I continued. "I don't have a name for it. And it's not just about sex or attention. It's something I haven't felt in so long I didn't know I was missing it." "I see you," he said simply. 3 words. Small, unpolished. But they landed like a stone in water, ripples spreading through everything. That was the thing. It wasn't about being adored or pursued. It was about being seen, not as a role, not as a habit, but as a woman with edges, with hunger, with silence that needed listening to. We didn't kiss. We didn't even touch. But the pull between us was physical. I could feel it in the space between our knees, in the air between our shoulders. Every breath felt borrowed. Eventually, we stood. "I should get back," I said. "Of course." We didn't say goodbye. I walked home slower, unsure of what to do with myself now that I'd broken my own rules again. When I reached our front door, my hand lingered on the handle. Inside was everything I had built. Everything safe, familiar. And yet, stepping inside felt like leaving something behind. My husband was in the kitchen. He had started dinner. Pasta, the one he always cooked when he was trying to be thoughtful. He smiled when he saw me. "I missed you this afternoon." "I went for a walk," I replied. "You okay?" "Just needed some air." He nodded, accepting that. I sat down at the table while he stirred the sauce, his back to me. I watched the way his shoulders moved, the way he hummed softly under his breath. He was a good man, a steady man, the kind people spend their lives hoping to find. But he didn't see me, not the version of me I'd become. He loved the idea of who I had been, the woman who managed, who comforted, who maintained balance. I had become someone else. After dinner, I washed the dishes. He kissed me on the cheek, thanked me, told me he'd be in the study for a while. I stood in the kitchen long after he left, my hands still wet from the rinse, the water cooling in the basin. And then, without thinking, I walked to the front door, opened it. And there, sitting on the top step of the porch, was a small paper bag. No name, no note, just folded neatly and left in silence. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Inside was a single item, the same tea I had ordered that first day, unopened. I stood in the doorway for a long time, bag clutched to my chest, the night air brushing against my skin like a question waiting to be answered. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed beside my husband, his arm draped across my hip in a gesture so habitual it barely registered. His breathing was steady, deep, the sound of someone at peace, unaware of the storm forming in the same bed. I stared at the ceiling, the shadows cast by the window blinds crawling across the white surface like slow, deliberate thoughts. The paper bag still sat on the kitchen counter. I hadn't opened the tea inside, though I'd unfolded the top twice and folded it back just as many. There was no note, no sign, but it didn't matter. The gesture was louder than anything he could have written. He hadn't forgotten. He had remembered the exact brand, the moment, the weight of that first quiet contact. And he had brought it back to me, not with expectation, not with demand, but with clarity. He knew, and now I did too. The next morning, I moved slowly through the house. I showered, dressed, made coffee. I didn't speak much. My husband noticed. He asked if something was wrong. I said no. Just tired. He nodded, sipped his drink, then launched into a story about someone at work and their disastrous attempt at managing a team presentation. I laughed where I needed to, offered a few quiet responses. He didn't press. He never pressed. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window. The tea was still on the counter beside me, unopened. My fingers rested on the edge of the table, tapping a rhythm that didn't match any song I could recall. I felt like I was standing on a cliff, toes curling over the edge, waiting to see if the wind would push me forward or pull me back. The doorbell rang around midday. It wasn't him, just a neighbor asking about a package mistakenly delivered to our address. I handed it over, made small talk, smiled. But the blood in my body didn't slow for minutes afterward. My pulse thudded in my throat, loud and insistent. That was how it was now. Every sound at the door, every footstep outside, every shift of shadow. It could be him, or it couldn't. Both possibilities held equal weight. By evening, I had exhausted every task in the house. I changed the sheets, organized the linen closet, scrubbed the stovetop even though it was already clean. My hands needed something to do. My mind was dangerous when left alone. My husband came home earlier than usual. He brought a bottle of wine, a bag of groceries, and a look I hadn't seen in a long time. "I thought maybe we could cook together," he said. I nodded, We chopped vegetables, stirred sauces, moved around each other in the small kitchen like dancers who'd forgotten the choreography, but were still trying to find the beat. He made jokes. I smiled. He reached across the counter once to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers lingered. My breath caught. Later, we ate in the dining room instead of the kitchen. He lit a candle, poured the wine, asked me how I'd been feeling lately. Not in the casual, passing way, but with real intention. I stared at him for a moment, unsure of how to answer. "I've been thinking a lot," I said. About how we got here." He set his fork down, leaned slightly forward. "Are you unhappy?" he asked. The question, direct and plain, hit harder than any accusation. "No," I said. "Not exactly." "Then what is it?" I looked at my hands. "I feel invisible," I said finally. He didn't speak, not right away. Just studied me, the way someone studies a photograph they hadn't really seen before. "I didn't know," he said, voice softer now. "I didn't either. Not until recently." A long pause. Then, "Is there someone else?" I lifted my eyes to his. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He nodded once, as if he'd suspected but hadn't wanted to believe it. He stood slowly, walked into the living room, poured himself another glass of wine. I followed, sat on the arm of the sofa watching him. "I never wanted to hurt you," I said. "I know," he replied. That was the thing. He did know. He wasn't angry. He wasn't loud. He was heartbroken in that quiet, heavy way that feels harder to witness than rage. We didn't fight. We didn't accuse. We just sat there, both understanding that the shape of our life had changed. Later that night, he reached for me in bed. Gently, with hesitation. I didn't pull away. I let him kiss me, touch me. I let his hands move across my body like someone trying to remember a map they once knew by heart. I responded, not out of guilt, not out of desire, but out of a need to feel something connect again. But even as his body pressed against mine, I felt the absence of everything that used to hold us together. I felt his love, his history with me, but not his hunger, not his wonder, not the electricity that came from being seen as more than safe. Afterward, he kissed my shoulder and fell asleep, his breath soft against my back. I lay awake again. In the dark, my thoughts returned to the tea, to the porch, to his hands, to that moment in the guest room when my skin remembered it could be wanted, to the bench where he said, "I see you." And I knew then that this story wasn't over. Not yet. I didn't know how it would end or who I would be by the time it did. But I knew I wasn't going back to pretending. Morning didn't bring clarity. It came quietly, as it always did, with pale light filtering through the blinds and the soft scuff of footsteps down the hallway. My husband made the coffee before I even left the bed. I could hear the measured sounds, water filling the kettle, the familiar rattle of cups on ceramic. 2 mugs, one for him, one for me. A ritual we never questioned, even when the meaning behind it started to slip. He tried to smile. I did too, but we both knew. A smile isn't a bridge. It's a curtain pulled over something neither of us could name aloud. We drank in silence. His fingers brushed mine when he handed me the cup, and I didn't move away. But I didn't linger either. Everything was perfectly ordinary, perfectly restrained, and utterly unrecognizable. After breakfast, he dressed for work. I followed him to the door out of habit, checking keys, wallet, phone, though I knew he never forgot. He paused with his hand on the doorknob and looked at me for a moment longer than usual. "Call me if you want to talk," he said. I nodded. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. When the door closed, the silence came back immediately. Dense, familiar, heavy in the way silence becomes when there's too much truth caught underneath it. The paper bag still sat on the kitchen counter. It had become something between an object and a symbol, no longer just a container for tea, but a marker of everything that had unraveled since the moment it arrived. I had picked it up countless times, folded and unfolded the top, set it back down. I never opened it. Not once. It was both invitation and accusation, a quiet echo of a choice I had already made. I walked to the window. Outside, the sky was white and low, the kind of colorless cloud cover that makes everything feel suspended. Not moving forward, not falling back. Just still. I didn't know if I wanted him to come back. I didn't know if I could bear it if he did. But I knew this much. If he showed up, I wouldn't close the door. I stepped into the backyard. The patio stones were still damp from last night's rain. I pulled a cardigan tight around me and walked to the bench under the old tree where my husband and I used to sit with glasses of wine in the early summer. We hadn't come out here in months. The chairs were still slightly crooked from the last time I'd swept around them. No one had noticed. I sat, letting the cold seep through my jeans. I welcomed it. I needed to feel something concrete, something outside of thought. 15 minutes passed, maybe more. I didn't check the time. I simply sat there, surrounded by the ordinary life I had once clung to so tightly. Then I heard footsteps, not approaching with confidence, not heavy or fast. Just there. A slow rhythm across the gravel path on the other side of the gate. I didn't turn. I closed my eyes for one breath, then opened them. He stood just outside. No delivery bag, no uniform. Just a black jacket, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense. His eyes found mine across the yard, and for a moment, neither of us moved. He didn't open the gate. He didn't assume anything. I tried to stay away, he said. I wanted to leave this alone. I stood up but didn't move toward him. My voice was quiet, steady. But you didn't. He shook his head. Because I can't. He looked exhausted, not from lack of sleep, but from restraint, from wanting and holding back. I don't know what this is, I said. And I'm not here to make promises I can't keep. I don't want promises, he said. I just needed to know you still felt it. I took a slow step forward, then another. We stood on opposite sides of the gate, inches apart. I reached for the latch and opened it. Not in invitation, but in understanding. He stepped in. I didn't touch him. We walked together to the bench and sat side by side, facing nothing in particular. I could feel his presence more than I saw him. The way the heat of his arm warmed the air between us. The way our breaths synchronized after a minute in the quiet. I don't know where this ends, I said. Neither do I. The honesty sat between us like something fragile and rare. But for the first time, I didn't feel the need to define anything. We sat for a long time. Didn't kiss, didn't speak again. The silence wasn't loaded anymore. It was shared. When he stood, I didn't stop him. He didn't linger. After he left, I stayed outside. The wind had picked up slightly. It moved through the tree branches, rustling leaves that hadn't yet fallen. I walked back inside slowly, letting my hand trail along the edge of the doorway. The house looked the same, but I didn't feel like I was returning to anything. I was just passing through. The tea was still on the counter. I walked toward it, unfolded the paper bag for the last time, pulled out the box, opened it. My hands were steady. I boiled the water, watched the steam rise and curl. I placed the bag in the mug, poured, and waited as the color deepened. The scent lifted into the air. Floral, warm, subtle. I sat down at the table, lifted the cup, took a sip. And for the first time in months, I didn't flinch at the taste. I wasn't healed. I wasn't sure. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him. Not of the silence. Not of myself.